You want me to put that on my Tudor?
This one's wife. Why are they hiding the kids? Archie and Lilibet are 4 and 2.5. They achieved Prince and Princess status. They are the children of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and yet they are rarely seen. There are occasional photographs which are released, little bits of footage that have appeared in their Shitflix documentary. But the actual instances where the children are seen in public, the children are seen with their parents, is extremely limited. And this, of course, prompts the question, why is this? In order to understand why we see so little of the children, it, of course, is useful to do so by understanding who is it who has control of them. Naturally, the parents. Now, we know that there are nannies that are involved, but ultimate control vests with this one's wife and Harry. And therefore, in the circumstances, when you understand the classification of the parents, that brings insight as to why the children are treated in the way that they are. Harry has to go along with what this one's wife, his handler, states. If he doesn't, he finds himself devalued. The old pink pods get tasered, he's banished to the chicken coop. But the fact is, no matter to what extent he wants to parent in a particular way, his views are relegated to those of his wife because she's in charge. Since she is a narcissist, she must have that control. And therefore, ultimately, the parenting of the children is governed by the narcissism of this one's wife, both in terms of not allowing Harry to take certain steps with regard to the children, not allowing the nannies to behave in a particular way to them, and ultimately her own interactions with them. And that has to be borne in mind in relation to why it is that the children are barely seen. Of course, there is the obvious contradiction that exists. This one's wife regularly talks about how she loves being a mother, that being a mother is the most important thing in her life, and yet she never actually talks particularly much about how she parents the children. There was a silence as to the birth itself. She doesn't talk about many things that they do, and she utilizes them, as a narcissist would do, as props to triangulate the broader public, magazines, news outlets, for the purposes of controlling them, drawing fuel from them, and managing that facade of being such a good mother. And yet she brings the children into play on a regular basis by talking about them in terms of how wonderful it is being a mother to them, but yet then never shows them. They never make much of an appearance. And of course, in a sense, that's entirely typical of the narcissist. As I've explained to you on many occasions, if the narcissist can get to the prime aims by just talking about them rather than doing them, then that's all you'll get from the narcissist. Thus, the narcissist might say to you, "I can't wait to marry you," but then you never get married to the narcissist. Why? The narcissist was able to control you with the promise of marriage. You gave fuel in reaction to that. You provided residual benefits as a consequence of believing you were going to get married. Therefore, there's no need for the narcissist to actually marry you. "Oh, I can't wait to take you on holiday. We're going to go to Mauritius." You react enthusiastically to that suggestion. Thus, that puts you under control. You're giving fuel. You might dole out a bit of the old "how's your father" as a consequence of that, providing a residual benefit, and yet no holiday to Mauritius ever manifests. Why? Because the narcissist has been able to achieve the prime aims through talk rather than doing the walk. And it's similar with this one's wife. If she can gain that control and fuel by talking about the children and talking about what a fantastic mother she is, she gets that control, she gets that fuel, she manages the facade, and then she doesn't actually have to do anything by way of showing you the interactions with the children or showing the children. But there are a variety of reasons which may unlock why it is that the children aren't seen. The first is, as I've just explained, it's easier just to talk rather than show and interact. But let us consider further reasons. The most obvious one is the children simply do not exist. And therefore, if the children don't exist, then you're not going to be able to show them off repeatedly. You can talk about them, but not show them. And there are those that believe that child actors have been used rather than there being actual children. I've explained elsewhere that whilst this scenario does seem somewhat unlikely, it is a possibility for a narcissist to behave that way. And although it's probably one of the more unusual reasons for the failure to see the children, it's a possibility, albeit a slim one. Another reason is that it's quite simply easier to go to various places without them, because then Harry and this one's wife can do what they want. Those of you who are parents listening will remember those occasions where you might have been able to get a relative to look after your children for a night or possibly a weekend, and that sense of liberation that you experienced as a consequence of being apart from your cherished crotch goblins. You were able to knock back a few drinks and not worry about being compos mentis to look after the children. You could lie in the next day without somebody jumping up and down on the bed. And yet, those instances, of course, are few and far between, because as a parent, you discharged your obligations as a parent. Whereas, with Harry and this one's wife, it's different. All of you recognised that you had an obligation as a parent and that you couldn't keep foisting your children off on other people. You couldn't necessarily afford to have nannies always looking after them. And you actually wanted to be with your children, notwithstanding the fact that, as I've heard from many people, it's very difficult being a parent at times. However, for the Sussexes, Harry has been brought up with a situation where he was regularly looked after by nannies, and therefore it's entirely natural for him to have such an arrangement. And therefore, for him to have the children looked after by nannies is not unusual in the slightest. Therefore, it's natural to him. For this one's wife, there is no maternal bond. She has no emotional empathy for the children. And she's lazy. Accordingly, if there's a choice between having to pack bags with all the various accoutrements that are required for a child to then take them to, say, New York, even if a nanny comes along as well, it's too much like hard work. It limits her, and therefore that limiting effect upon her is a threat to control, so her narcissism rejects it. Where there's an instance of being able to do something driven by her sense of entitlement that comes up against the question of accountability, you have two children you need to look after, and therefore that means you're not going to be able to do all of the things that you would want to do, the narcissism basically says, get rid of them. Thus, leave them at home, have the nannies look after them. Going down to the farmer's market, what child wouldn't fancy a little stroll with their parents and lots of things to see? No, because that would then mean having to bow to the needs of the child, pausing if they want to look at something, not being able to talk as long as you would want with somebody, because the child's going, mummy, 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 tugging on your skirt or your trousers. And thus, her narcissism guides her to reject those constraints upon her sense of entitlement by essentially saying to her, when you do things, do them without the children. Accordingly, one of the reasons is it's simply easier to go places without them so she can do what she wants. The next reason is kind of linked to the reason that I've just explained to you, but centres around the issue of the facade. As a mid-range narcissist, this one's wife operates a facade of a supposedly good mother, fashion icon, kind person, empathic, fun, relatable. Children have tantrums. Children get their sticky fingers on things. Children break things. Children touch things. Children run in a direction towards traffic, so you're forced to run after them and stop them. I've seen this with my nieces and nephews. And I've seen the way that my siblings have had to deal with those children. Now, ordinarily, that's not such an issue because they recognise it as part of parenting, but also they know how to discipline the children. They are able to utilise that look or voice that would cause the child to behave themselves. The problem that this one's wife has is that because of her sense of entitlement, she spent such little time with them that she doesn't actually know how to parent. First of all, she has no emotional empathy for them. But of course, she could learn the parenting skills, as many narcissists do, as a consequence of mimicry. But she hasn't got that because she doesn't spend much time with them. And furthermore, and this is hugely important, the children probably wouldn't accept being disciplined by her because they simply don't spend enough time with her. Archie's more likely to be disciplined by a pair of trees than he is by this one's wife. It's the nannies that deal with all of that. So the problem that this one's wife has is that were she out in public with the children and they started to play up, as children invariably do, witness loose cannon Louis and his behaviour, but he responds to stern words from Catherine because she regularly has to discipline him. Whereas with Archie and Lilibert, if they started to play up in public, this one's wife not only wouldn't necessarily know how to respond, but if she did attempt to discipline them, it's likely that they wouldn't respond to it, and thus they would continue to pose a threat to her control. And the problem that she then has is this: her facade is likely to crack because she would respond by flipping out in public, striking the child, screaming at them, having a strop herself, and that all-important and precious facade would fracture. Accordingly, the narcissism recognises that the risk that is posed by having to deal with the children, and therefore suggests leave them at home to avoid that damage occurring. She simply wouldn't be able to handle them. In public, the facade would be damaged, and therefore the narcissism needs to protect that. Another possible reason, again linked to her narcissism, why the children are not seen is they simply don't meet with her expectations. As a narcissist, she believes that her children are beautiful, perfect, talented, that rainbows come out of their mouths when they speak, that they're the first to do anything in terms of their progress, learning to talk, learning to walk, all of those things, all of those milestones. And the fact is, she expects perfection because, remember, they are little mirrors. They are little chunks of her that she utilises as extensions of herself to seek the prime aims subconsciously elsewhere. And if the children do not meet her expectations with regard to how they look, with regard to how they behave, with regard to their intelligence, with regard to their progress, the fact is she doesn't want the world to see that because it reflects badly on her. Think about it. If the children were little cuties in the way that the Wales's children are, if they were particularly talented, a narcissist could not resist the urge to show them off. Why? Because those children are an extension of the narcissist, and therefore the narcissist draws fuel from people responding, "Gosh, your children are gorgeous. Oh, thank you very much." But that other appliance demonstrates they're under control with such a comment and provides fuel. The fact is, where a narcissist believes that their children are little cuties, that they're particularly talented, that they're adorable in their little ways and behaviours, they will use any opportunity to show them off because it enables them to get to the prime aims using their children. And therefore, it's a possibility that for whatever reason, the children do not meet her expectation. It might be looks, it might be behaviour, it might be talent, whatever it is. But because they don't meet the expectations that she has, therefore they're kept away because, quite frankly, they would then reflect badly upon her. Remember, she has no emotional empathy for them. So irrespective of what little imperfections that they may have. And of course, as I understand, all parents regard their children as fantastic in one way or another because they're their children. But she would not, as a narcissist. And if they were so beautiful, so cute, so special, etc., she would regularly be parading them in order to use them to get to those prime aims. And the fact that she does not suggests that they're perhaps not meeting her expectations in some way. Linked to that, a further reason why we might not see the children is quite simply they're too white. And this goes against her person of colour narrative that she utilises, and of course the claims of being 43% Nigerian, that this would cause an inherent contradiction. I would see this as less likely simply because that the narrative that she uses as a person of colour, she can drop the very next day where she needs to be white. So similarly with the children, just because they may look very white, which goes against her person of colour narrative, her compartmentalisation wouldn't necessarily deal with that appropriately. And therefore, whilst it is a possibility, I see that as being somewhat unlikely. Of course, this does link into the suggestion that the children were born through a surrogate as well, which might be the case that there is an issue with regard to how they look because of that surrogacy. But as I state, I think ultimately her compartmentalisation would jettison that particular point. The next suggestion, and this is something that was offered by a contributor on the Saint This One's Wife subreddit, they use her full name, as you know, I do not, where one contributor suggested that the reason you can't see the children is that they can't get the same child actors because there's an ongoing actors' strike. This links back to the fact that they don't actually exist and that child actors are hired when they are occasionally seen. And the fact is that because there is a strike and they can't get the same child actors, this presents them with a problem. Is this likely? Well, this all depends on whether you believe the children exist or not. Again, that is a scenario which seems less likely, albeit cannot be completely ruled out, because a narcissist could well engage in such deceit. Another reason as to why you don't see the children could be because you basically only get to see them if you pay, and nobody is paying. Remember, these children are there as an extension of what this one's wife requires, and money is hugely important to her as a residual benefit, and therefore in the circumstances, she would merchandise the children as much as she could, and it may just be the case that nobody's getting the checkbook out, and therefore that's why the children are kept away from public view. Finally, again linked to her narcissism, another reason why she may not allow the children to be seen is quite simply she does not want to share the spotlight with them. She is a narcissist, which means she has to be front and centre in order to control people and draw in the fuel. She needs to be the one that is seen. And if she's there with children, and because they're not seen very often, the spotlight would shift onto them and away from her. Of course, you may well think, gosh, isn't it awful to be so envious of your children? But that's what narcissists are like. They cannot stand for other people to be the centre of attention in the spotlight, because that means the fuel is going to them. They won't need it. They're not narcissists, but it doesn't matter. Because in the world of the narcissist, the fact that the attention is going elsewhere wounds that narcissist and starves them of fuel. And thus, her narcissism would direct her not to involve the children to ensure that she is the main character, that she is in the spotlight, that she is able to control and draw fuel. Accordingly, there are a number of cogent reasons, some more likely than others, but all linked to her narcissism. Because as I explained at the outset, if you start to understand what a person is, and it's ascertained that they are a narcissist, that equips you with a special set of knowledge to then understand why they behave as they do. Many people, as I repeatedly tell you, struggle to understand why Harry's wife behaves as she does. But this one's wife behaves in the way that she does as a consequence of her narcissism. It governs all of her behaviour when it comes to interacting with other people. Which of those reasons do you think are applicable to the fact that we do not see the children? Is it one in particular, or do you see that a number of factors that I've mentioned there apply to why the children are not seen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.